Hi guys, Marian here. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm giving the lowdown on all the Jewish aspects of Russian Doll Season 2. I love making commentary videos on my channel about things happening in the pop culture space when they cross over to the Jewish space. So I just finished binge watching Season 2 of Russian Doll and couldn't wait to film this video for you guys. So I hope you like it. If you do, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and hit that red subscribe button down below. Also, let me know if there's any other videos like this that you want me to film. Someone just the other day commented, could I film like a top 10 list of best Jewish movies or best Jewish TV shows or Jewish actors? And I was like, absolutely. So that is on my to-do list, probably around summertime, which is almost here. It's a great time for me to film those kind of pop culture videos while there's not too many Jewish holidays and things going on. So subscribe if you want to see more like this. Okay, so Russian Doll Season 2. I'm going to skip over Season 1 because Season 2 just came out. Season 1 did have some like Jewishy elements. I mean, Natasha Lyonne is just like this, you know, she's the epitome of like a Jewish New Yorker. But there wasn't even much that I like would have thought to film a video on. Season 2 is jam-packed. Warning, spoiler alert. If you have not finished watching Season 2, definitely go finish watching it before you watch this video. Otherwise, there will be a lot of spoilers. Okay, so let's start off with the first moment that actually made me laugh, and that's when Nadia, or the character Nadia, takes a hit of a joint or something, and she says something like, Happy Purim or something, and it's just the way she delivers the line is so funny. I mean, Natasha Lyonne's amazing. It just made me laugh, and it also was very, I feel like a lot of Season 2 has a lot of inside baseball kind of Jewish moments that like anyone would appreciate and think was funny, but if you are an American Jew, they're just so much funnier. They hit so much harder. And what I love about this kind of commentary about Jewish life is it's really about like American Jewish life, much more so than like, you know, ultra-religious Judaism. And like there's been a lot of series recently like Unorthodox, like you guys have seen them, that are all like really a portrayal of ultra-religious Jewish life. But what I love about this show is even though it's not about Judaism and Jewish life, it has so many like cultural isms woven in throughout that it just really hits home, I think, especially to me or to anyone who had parents or grandparents who were in the Holocaust, or, you know, were second generation American Jews and like, you know, have assimilated in some ways, but there's still this strong Jewish history. So there's two major topics I want to touch on. One is the generational trauma, and the second is the historical aspect of the Holocaust that this show gets into. So let's start with the generational trauma. So this is a really interesting one for anyone who has family that survived the Holocaust. That trauma obviously has been brought with them to America. Like there's just no way around that. And what's really interesting is the children and now the grandchildren of how that has sort of affected them. So sometimes it's little things like how Jewish grandparents of that generation are very nervous about spending money, and very, there's also a lot of food related things, like very nervous of running out of food or not having enough food. There's a lot of jokes about when you go to your mom's or grandma's house, they're like, just want to feed you. And you know, that's like a Jewish cultural thing, but part of that stems from food insecurity during so many years in Europe, and then like the ultimate food insecurity of being a survivor in the Holocaust and literally having nothing. What was one of the really interesting aspects, and this ties into the historical part too, is that when we think about Holocaust survivors and refugees in general, it's easy to paint a picture of them being completely destitute, like having nothing, being, you know, no money, no belongings, no place in society. But what's so interesting is before they were displaced, before they were taken to the camps and all of that, many Jewish people lived this thriving life in Europe. Some of them were, you know, professors and doctors and lawyers, and they had a lot of money and a lot of wealth and a lot of clout in society. So when Nadia's character goes back and tries to, you know, take some of that back. It's just, I mean, it's one of the hardest scenes to watch, but just to see all those crates of things and just to know like that people's whole lives were in there, and that after the Holocaust, if they were lucky enough to survive, they had nothing compared to, you know, how they were a few years before. So back to the generational trauma. So I read something really interesting, which is that okay, stay with me here for this. I think I've talked about this on my channel before. You were in your mother's womb, right? And she was in her mother's womb. So there's an aspect of generational trauma that's physically in the body, right? So if your mom is depressed, even before she's pregnant or when she's pregnant, there are elements of that that can immerse in the womb. Now that doesn't mean that, you know, your life will be strongly altered in one way, this way or that definitively, but just that there's an aspect of history that's carried on through our physical bodies, and I just find that really fascinating. So the way the series goes back and forth between the bodies just kind of reminded me of that aspect and how tied we are to our past generations, especially this generation, who so much of our ethos is about individuality and escaping like past family traumas and, you know, doing what works for you and YOLO and solo and all of that. But the truth is, we are intrinsically tied to generations that came before us and what they experienced, even in our physical bodies, in a way that we can't escape. I apologize if this is getting like way too out there, but I just am really fascinated by this kind of thing. So back to generational trauma. So the generation whose parents survived the Holocaust had a lot of these money issues, food issues, that no matter how safe they were in American society, no matter how much education they had gained, no matter how their careers had advanced, they were sort of never able to let go of that fear that it one day might be ripped from them. And like, that's completely understandable. I'm in no way, you know, critiquing that, just to understand like what it must have been like as the next generation, where, you know, all your friends around you are celebrating this free American society, and you kind of don't think twice that that might be ripped away one day. But for your parents, it's so much a part of their everyday life. And a lot of Jewish culture is about remembering the past, not just the Holocaust, but, you know, all our holidays are steeped in these historical events. So it's understandable that the Judaism and the trauma are very well tied together. And then one of the darker sides of that is that a lot of that generation, the children of Holocaust survivors, also then grew up with trauma themselves and had aspects of their childhood that were not always happy, and that, you know, resulted in lots of anxiety and depression because of what their parents had experienced. And now my generation is sort of almost escaping from that, but not quite, because again, these things like get passed down. That was really interesting how the show expressed that. And I don't want to give away the last scene, even though I warned you guys there would be spoilers. But I thought the very last scene when Nadia is holding the baby and has to make her choice is just like, oh, it's so emotional. But it's this way of like forgiving whoever our, you know, mothers and grandmothers were, because we understand what they went through, if that makes sense. So loved all that. And now moving on to the historical parts. So to me, this series did an outstanding job of showcasing an element of the Holocaust that we often don't talk about. People become so fixated on the horrors of the death camps that there's so much of the rich culture and rich Judaism that existed before that, and what life was like as Europe was slowly disintegrating into the nightmare that it became, that we don't know so much about that time. One thing that I was really thinking about when Nadia was in the warehouse with the crates is like, what happened to all of that stuff? Like, I know it's, you know, it was in Europe and it was sold and some of it got back. There was actually just a recent case, I think, where a family sued to get their artwork back. But even just the little things, like a little Shabbat candlesticks or a Kiddush cup, like, would be just so immensely valuable. Could you imagine, like, to a family who was able to get that back now? I know that my camp that I went to growing up had a Holocaust Torah, and there's a few of them, and they are very well like kept, and there's records about them. So there's Torahs that survived the Holocaust and that are in use now. It's so extremely precious to have something like that. When Nadia was looking at the artwork and the photos. It's like, that stuff is so precious, but it's just all lost. And then also the scene with the priest, right? So there was a lot of course, there were a lot of people who helped and did amazing things and risked their life. There's actually an organization, I think it's called the Righteous Gentiles, but it honors those people now who risked their lives to help Jews. And so I just love that they showcased like that priest in that way. And you saw how one little thing, like taking a letter, really just shows like the power of humanity in those extreme moments. So at the end of season 2, I think we're left with a character, Nadia, who has a lot more empathy for the faults of her mother and grandmother because of the historical context of what they went through. Not that all is forgiven, but just that maybe if she was in their shoes, which she physically was in the series, that she would have made the same mistakes or same choices that they had. So that is my hot take on Russian Doll season 2. I absolutely loved it. It was the first show that I didn't second screen, like didn't also have my phone out doing whatever, that I've watched in a long time. So I really recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. Definitely start with season 1 to get the context, but season 2 was just off the charts amazing for me. So if you guys like this review, let me know what more you want to see, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!